lagoon boat?
Go have a boat to go out in your lagoon.
I guess, but I guess you have a lot of repair bills then on it too, Patrick. So I mean, yeah. That's just the basic for personal, and same with the liabilities. Because you're gonna have expenses if you're paying yourself for wage and stuff like that. And then there's a couple of the ratios, but we'll talk about more of those in depth later.
Alright, I'm going to go specifically over assets like we mentioned, the current, intermediate, long-term, and liabilities, current, intermediate, long-term, and fixed. Current liability or current assets. Anybody know what a current asset would be? Okay, what you got? Cash money, like what you got in checking and savings, grain and inventory, current livestock at the market price, you know, prepaid supplies. Then you got your intermediate assets. Anybody want to name something there? Of course. Your intermediate assets would be like breeding livestock, machinery, and perennial crops. And your long-term assets would obviously be your buildings and land. And you got your liabilities. Current liabilities would be something such as your accounts payable, current operating loan, and the principal portion of the loan that's due within the next 12 months. Intermediate would be loans that need to be paid off within the next 5 years. And then your long-term would be anything over 5 years. And somebody tell me what a fixed asset is. I'm going to call it Liz. Ethan, what's a fixed liability?
Fixed liability or asset?
Yeah, liability, not asset.
Something you got to pay no matter what, so you got to tax it.
Like, such as our ripper that's outside, no matter if we use it or not, it's going to depreciate.
Okay, so now that you have compiled all your numbers for what your assets, your liabilities are, and put them into the categories, what do you do with them? So we're going to go into talking about the ratios that are involved. So solvency kind of measures, it's more of a long-term, looking towards the future measurement. One of the main ones that falls under solvency would be your debt to asset. And later on we're going to go through and talk about specifically how to calculate these. But so your debt to asset ratio tends to be higher for larger farms and farms that specialize in feeding livestock. Can somebody maybe explain why that would be? Just the livestock part of it. Swine committee? Why would debt to asset ratio be higher if you were specialized in feeding livestock?
Like you'll have more debt
Right.
because you have to feed your animals, so you'll have a lot of feed on hand.
Animals are expensive.
You only sell certain things right after the finished go.
Fixed assets.
You said your fixed assets, your buildings. If you're going to invest in putting up a hog building, you've got those costs spread out. So in Iowa farms, does anybody know what the common ratio is for debt to asset? What percent? Take a guess.
50%?
30 to 40 is according to Iowa State's data. And then a guideline for controlling your debt is to not let your liabilities exceed your yearly gross income. So something to keep in mind there. Then your liquidity, that's kind of more of your current liquid. Typically, it's stuff that's coming due within the next 12 months, and you want a higher ratio for those. So, for example, your current ratio, a 2.0 would be excellent. 1.5 would be good. So to keep in mind there. And your current kind of shows stuff within the next 12 months. Intermediate, we've gone over 5 years, we said, and net capital.
Profitability ratio is basically looking at how your ability to make money. Pretty self-explanatory. Measures farm profitability. and indirectly measures how well you are at managing your farm. Within that, there's percent equity, which is basically the ownership interest in your farm, and measures the potential for your farm to grow. Another part of that, debt to equity, gives you an idea of how much debt you've used to finance your farm's equity. We'll be going through both of those, or actually, yeah, both of those today in your guys' activity.
Some different ratio calculations that we'll be going over later on the next activity. Is the debt to asset ratio, which is your total liabilities divided by total assets. I mean, pretty easy. You can punch numbers into your calculator and figure it out. But you have to be able to figure out, add up all your liabilities and all your assets first. I mean, you have to add in every little thing when you're figuring out your net worth statement. Especially, I mean, you want to make sure you add in all your assets, because that way it looks better when you go to the banker. And the liabilities, they most likely already know about, so you better add them in, otherwise you're looking bad because you're not putting everything in there, and then they're not happy either. So you better not try to cheat the system too much. But the debt to asset ratio, less than 1 or 100% or however you figure it, is most of companies' assets are financed through equity, and it's more than that, it's financed through debt, or you owe more. And highly leveraged companies have a high debt to asset ratio, so they aren't able to do as much. You're in more problems there. You run in, like, you get up to 60-70%. You want to go buy another piece of ground or equipment, it's going to be harder for a bank to look at you and be like, well, you already have this much debt. Your debt is over your assets already. So, current ratio, current assets divided by current liabilities, and we already talked about what both those are. So, pretty easy. One of the main things there would be, if you're doing it in December for your current assets, is have an idea what like your grain storage is. You got to put a dollar value on it, and then that's why your net worth can change so much, because corn's $6 a day. Next week it's 6.5, and you have 100,000 bushels. Your current assets just changed, and that just changed everything. But it's a liquidity ratio, which measures the company's ability to pay short-term obligations. And higher the ratio, the more liquid the company is. So it's better. Current assets more than twice current liabilities. The company has short-term financial strength. But I mean, this is just measuring short-term. So, but if your current liabilities is more, I mean, if it's not twice like that, you don't have as much strength. And you start getting to a point where your current liabilities exceed your current assets, you run into problems because you got payments you got to make, and you don't have that current assets to pay.
Alright, your intermediate ratio, it's current assets plus intermediate assets divided by current liabilities plus intermediate liabilities. And then your fixed ratio is your long-term assets divided by your long-term liabilities. Basically, again, these are just broken down off of the debt to asset. It's pretty much the same. Ideally, you want between 30 and 50. Once you get over 50, you're kind of pushing it, and 30 would be real good. According to William Edwards, I talked to him, these aren't used very often. Bank may use them just to get nitpicky, but as far as going into your bank, rarely they use these.
The net capital is kind of opposite of debt to asset ratio. Instead of taking total liabilities divided by total assets, you just flip them around. You take total assets divided by total liabilities. Then your percent equity is just basically take your total assets minus your total liabilities. Then after that, you take your divided by total assets.
Okay. And then debt to equity is similar to debt to asset. You're taking your total liabilities divided by your net worth, or your assets minus your liabilities, the equity. As you can see, kind of on a side note, why it's important to understand how these ratios work. When you're starting to plug all these numbers in, they're very similar, and so you have to make sure you know what you're trying to find, what your goal is, or you could end up backwards and upside down.